Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Bart.
You have found the Dark Oak. Today I tell you the story of David Sneddon, a missing person who we think might be very much alive but unable to come home. We'll give you all the details and see what you think. Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through our charity, the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. And in this case, it is Futures Without Violence. To find out more information, you can head to our Instagram account, The Dark Oak Podcast, our webpage, thedarkoak.com, or stay to the end of this episode and we will give you all of the details. Hey, Bart. Good to see you again.
Hey, Steph.
Listeners, I have to tell you, we just had this very funny exchange because when Cynthia and I are in the pod lab, we really love to look at each other because that's part of what makes what we do entertaining and interesting. Because as podcasters, we are interested in these stories too. And the way our show works, one of us is always presenting to the other. So we like to get real reactions. We like to see the reactions on the person's face. And we like to make eye contact when we're discussing different questions or concepts or theories. And when Barton sat down, he had his mic kind of covering his face where I couldn't see it. And it felt unusual to me. And he brought up this really good point that normally when he listens to the Dark Oak, he's not participating. So he just hears Cynthia and I in his ear holes. It's kind of funny him actually being a participant. It was such a funny conversation.
Yeah, and I didn't really think about it, but when she was like, don't you want to look at each other face to face? And I was like, I guess so, but I'm just so used to hearing you just audio. And so that's when I listen to Dark Oak. So, but want to remind anyone that didn't hear why you have me on the show instead of the much superior Cynthia.
Oh, come on. You are a wonderful substitute, even though we clearly miss Cynthia. Cynthia's mother is now at peace after a 19-month battle with ovarian cancer. And it's been a struggle, as you can imagine, for her family. She's taken off several weeks to help nurse her mother. I just spoke with her before this recording, and she confirmed that there are zero regrets about spending time with her mother before she passed. It's just been such a blessing that Cynthia and her family have the time that they need to grieve and to heal. Cynthia did confirm she's going to be back for our 99th and 100th episode. And again, we are celebrating that 100th episode coming out at the end of this month. We are celebrating by giving you 2 episodes. And I'm going to apologize about this one being a little late out of the chute, but you know what? Sometimes life happens. However, I'm never going to let you guys down. This is your bonus episode, and Bart and I will be back with part 2 on Wednesday, so you won't have to wait too long for that. If you want to be part of our 100th episode giveaway, you can hop on over to our Instagram account where you can see photos of what you could win in our giveaway. We have an adorable candle that smells like chloroform. Not really. It's lavender and vanilla, but super cute. We also have these little wristlets, which can be used as pencil bags or to-go bags. They're little campus bags that have our logo on them. And they say, shh, I'm listening to my favorite mystery podcast. They are so adorbs. So you're definitely going to want to get on the list for that. You only have to do a few simple things. You need to follow us on Instagram, leave a comment on any Instagram post, give us a 5-star review wherever you love to listen, and then send us a message. That's it. Most of the messages have been pretty short, saying, I'm in, it's done. And then I give a little heart and a little love. But you could also send us something else. Maybe you have a case that you want us to cover. Maybe you have a theory about a case that we've already covered that maybe we didn't think of. I would love to hear that. That would be awesome if there's something that we haven't thought of. Maybe you found some very weird theory and the annals of Reddit that you can't wait to share with us. That would be an amazing time to do that. So think of us. Cynthia is seeing all of your well wishes and love, and it truly is helping to carry her. So keep those up. And again, today and part 2 of David Sneddon, and then Cynthia will be back. For now, I am loving spending time with Bart, and I think we can all agree he gives a new flavor to the podcast. And I think this case is totally in your wheelhouse. As an overview, David was a college student from Logan, Utah, who was, again, exploring China after finishing his summer language classes in Beijing. Now, on April 14th, 2004, while hiking a trail called Tiger Leaping Gorge, David just disappeared. After a cursory investigation, the Chinese and American governments both concluded that he must have fallen from the hiking trail and drowned in the gorge. There's a river that runs at the bottom of the gorge. His parents never believed this, especially after, again, they collected this contradictory information. But nevertheless, they were kind of forced to accept their son's fate. But then 7 years later, they learned information that turned this entire case on its head. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, this is going to be a 2-parter. And truthfully, that's just because I couldn't help myself. This is such a rabbit hole, especially when we get in part 2 where we cover the theories, because several of them sound implausible, but then you hear these different things have happened to other people. So I'm going to tell you a bit of those stories to, again, help narrow down in your mind what you think happened to David. In part 1, which I'm covering today, I'm going to introduce you to the amazing Sneddon family because they are hardcore. Really cool family. And I'm going to give you a little insight into the incredible life that David was leading. I'm also going to introduce you to some of the geography, culture, and people of China, specifically that South China region where David was spending the majority of his time. I'm going to go over his last known whereabouts and what we know about David's last day. We're going to go over the Chinese investigation, and then we're going to talk about the Sneddon's investigation. And then in part 2, we're going to talk about authorities' reaction to the Sneddon's investigation, and then go into theories. What on earth happened to David? And part 2 is where it's going to get real interesting. You really need to have part 1 to lay out everything that happened. And I'm going to go into detail today about that track that David was on. You know, Barton, our family is a traveling family. I can't say that China was ever on my bucket list, but after reading this, I think it might be. So I'm really excited about introducing you to a few of those historic monuments and the spectacular landscape that southern China has to offer. I do want to clarify that this case is also not about David Sneddon, the musician. I don't know if you're a fan of David Sneddon, but there's a very famous Scottish musician named David Sneddon, which I am very familiar with now because every single Google search I ever did came up with lots of David Sneddon music, which I did listen to while researching this case a few times. So if you have tuned into this podcast thinking I'm about to drop some like hot celebrity news, you're going to be very sad. So you may want to divert or maybe not, because this is also a great podcast. Okay, well, without further ado, let's get to this really intriguing story of David Sneddon. Now, this tale is
not the Scottish musician.
Not the Scottish musician, correct. So to get us started, I'm going to go back to the beginning when David's parents, Roy and Kathleen, met as undergrads in college. After falling in love and getting married, they both became professors at the University of Nebraska, where they stayed for over 40 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, dedication. Roy and Kathleen Sneddon are, even today, the picture of devotion. Obviously, their profession, but to each other as well. They have been married over 60 years at this point.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's even after losing a child, which we know can really put a strain on a relationship. Now, during their time in Nebraska, they welcomed 11 children, with David as their youngest, arriving on May 3rd, 1980. The Sneddons were also a devout Mormon family, meaning they traveled on mission trips all over the world. After Roy and Kathleen retired, they relocated to Logan, Utah, but the family never stopped traveling to far-flung destinations. They also regularly enjoyed hiking, backpacking, and camping throughout Wyoming. And as a matter of fact, they would spend weeks there every summer with other close-knit families.
Sounds great.
It does. David was extremely smart and outgoing. He had lots of friends, was adventurous and driven. He loved sports and ran cross country in high school, but he also loved musicals and singing in the choir. He also served as a youth in Eagle Scouts, where he learned wilderness survival and honestly just made him very comfortable and capable in the outdoors. In the spring of 2004, David finished his junior year at Brigham Young University. During the summer, he planned to travel to China to participate in an immersive language class studying Mandarin. After the summer, he planned to return in the fall to Brigham Young, where he would finish out his last year. Afterward, he planned to attend law school to become an international lawyer. And as soon as I read that, I actually asked you, what the heck does an international lawyer do? I don't know if you are an attorney. And so I said, what does one in international law do?
I'm not an international lawyer, but from what I understand, you essentially handle commercial transactions that go cross-border. So the ability to work out the details of what it will take to, let's say, purchase a company in another country, or a foreign buyer purchase one in our country, or what would it take to import, export things and stuff like that.
Well, it sounds like that really would have fit into David's wheelhouse. He really loved meeting people, meeting of all different cultures, and I can see him kind of just wanting to bring all that together.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense considering his family background.
Yeah. Also, everything I've shared about him, I just want to note, I mean, he sounds like the classic underachiever.
with all, facetiousness.
Yeah, with absolutely. Really a jack of all trades. And honestly, it sounded like he was doing them all well. Now, traveling to China to study language may seem like a big leap, but it wasn't that much of a stretch for David. See, David had already spent 2 years in South Korea as part of his 2-year Mormon missionary program. Now, a large part of the Mormon faith is believing strongly in humanitarian work and prophesizing, and all young people in the church are required to participate in a mission trip. So after attending 2 years at Brigham Young University, David spent 2 years in Seoul, South Korea, where he learned to speak fluent Korean. Interestingly, I think David was one of those people that had a brain for language because, again, I've said he spoke Korean and he's studying Mandarin. And in order to facilitate this, he enrolled in the BYU Language Immersion Program, which allows you to live with other students learning the same foreign language, like while you're also participating in your regular classes.
Oh, what a cool program.
Isn't that awesome? So while David lived on campus, he lived in the Chinese house, which is how he was learning Mandarin. So he learned Korean while he was in Korea, and then he's learning Mandarin while living in this Chinese house on the campus at Brigham Young University.
It's amazing. As someone who struggles with foreign language, I always marvel at people who have that sort of ability because my brain just doesn't work that way. So very impressive.
And to further this, his plan when he came back from his summer in China, when he went back for his senior year at Brigham Young, he planned to move into the Spanish house where he could learn Spanish as well.
Of course, yeah.
Of course. And crazy enough, we actually have a family friend who is amazing at languages.
Yeah, we sure do. My best friend, we were in the military together, and he did all kinds of language courses in the military and picked up several languages quickly. He had to learn Spanish at one point in about 60 days, and he actually passed the fluency exam after 60 days of study, which is ludicrous. But my mind does not work like that. So I'm very, very impressed by like my friend and David Sneddon and what they can do with that. It's just incredible.
Yeah, folks, if you do not have a friend who has this aptitude for learning languages, you should go find one because they are fascinating the way their brain works. I mean, it truly is a marvel to see how quickly they can pick things up and remember things. And I mean, it's one thing to learn maybe a second language, but when you start adding on third, fourth, and fifth languages, how does your brain absorb all of that? It's wild to me.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So at this time in our story, 24-year-old David has now finished his junior year at BYU and has freshly completed his summer in Beijing working on his Mandarin at the University of International Relations. David was attending classes with his friend and fellow BYU student George Bailey, and the two boys had rented an apartment together and by all accounts had an amazing summer. While David was there, he stayed in touch with his family through regular emails 2 or 3 times each week. And with each message, David confirmed that he was excited to be in China, but he was also looking forward to going home and finishing up his final year in college. After class ended, David and George planned to spend a couple days sightseeing other parts of China. With only 3 weeks until David was supposed to catch a flight to meet up with his brother Michael, who was living in Seoul, David wrote in an email to his mother that he was, quote, pumped to do some hardcore traveling, end quote, which sounds like a 24-year-old adventurer, right?
For sure.
So he planned a brisk journey through southern China. Now, in preparation, David withdrew $300 from his bank account to cover any cost. Then the two men boarded a 27-hour overnight sleeper train to the city called Guilin. Now, to give you an idea for geographic reference, the southern part of China is down by Myanmar, Tibet, Vietnam, just to give you an idea geographically where we're situated. Now, from all accounts, the boys had an incredible few days together, mountain biking, rafting, and enjoying the sights in the area. In a later interview, George would say that throughout their stay in China, there were no signs of danger. He said, quote, we both felt very safe. We thought no Chinese would ever touch an American because there'd be trouble, end quote. And at this time in 2004, China is really trying to reimagine the way it's perceived in the world. It was trying to open itself up to tourism and bringing in foreigners to explore some of their culture and history. So it was true that a foreigner being injured or at the extreme killed in China would have not been great for the Chinese image.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Then on August 9th, George and David separated to pursue different agendas for their final weeks in China. George left to visit friends in a nearby city, and David decided to head for a hiking trail known as Tiger Leaping Gorge. That night, David slept in the city of Lijiang, which is a common starting place for travelers ready to hike Tiger Leaping Gorge. The morning of August 11th, David emailed his parents saying, quote, I'm in Lijiang now in the western Yunnan province. I will take a bus to hike Tiger Leaping Gorge in about half an hour. I'm having a great time here, but nonetheless, I'm excited to come home, end quote. And that was the last time anyone that knew David would ever hear from him.
Wow.
At this point, I'm going to show you 2 maps of Tiger Leaping Gorge, because no matter how many articles I read or podcasts I listened to, I was having a really hard time visualizing this hike. And the landmarks of the hike are important to David's story. So to help everyone else out that's listening to this, I'm going to post these 2 maps, or I guess you would call them like trail maps, maybe, on our social media accounts, so you can follow along as well. One is a more hand-drawn guide that unfortunately I was not able to find the creator for. If you are the creator of this hand-drawn Tiger Leaping Gorge trekking map that I just posted on our Instagram account, can you please message me? I would love to give you credit for it. Also, I'd like to get your opinion on this case. The second map is a much more official looking map created by ChinaDiscovery.com. I like how on the more official map, it has timelines of how long it should take you to hike each area. And on these maps is really everything that you'll need to understand how to navigate Tiger Leaping Gorge. So it shows on either end the major cities that you would be bussed in from in order to begin the trail. Now, almost always it was a west to east navigation of the trail because the more strenuous and really picturesque part is on the west side. And then you would end on the east side of the trail. That's not to say you can't go back the other way, but that's just kind of the way it was designed.
Okay.
So if it is at all safe for you to be able to stop and pull up these maps, I highly encourage you to do so. Our Instagram account is the Dark Oak Podcast, and you can pull that up and just use it as reference as I'm talking about these different landmarks the different pieces of the trail, and then also the guest houses. That's really important to this story as well. Now, as an overview, Tiger Leaping Gorge is one of the world's deepest gorges, running approximately 12,000 feet along the Jinsha River, which is a 100-foot wide whitewater tributary of the Yangtze. The stunning cascading sheets of limestone and spectacular karst are situated between two mountains named Jade Dragon and Haba Snow. You can see that on that hand-drawn map. I love how this creator situated this map and kind of gives all those landmarks.
Yeah, it's very useful.
Isn't it really cool?
Yeah.
Now, the name of the gorge comes from a traditional folk tale of a courageous tiger that was being chased by a relentless hunter. To escape, the tiger leapt across the narrowest point of the gorge. Today, the tiger's crossing is marked by a large rock in the center of the river. Tiger Leaping Gorge officially opened to foreign visitors in 1993 when two well-marked and maintained trails were unveiled. There is a 14-mile low trail and a 16-mile high trail. Both provide spectacular views of the mountains, water, and ravine. Now, on this day, David chose the high trail, giving him a higher vantage point to see the cliffs and also the spectacular views of the gorge. And I will say most people that are physically able will choose the higher trail. It's just the more awe-inspiring trail of the two. The high trail climbs more than 3,700 feet through the canyon's thick mountain brush and sheer cliffs. This hike is considered a must for trekkers searching for remote panoramic vistas in China.
Yeah, 3,700 feet of altitude gain is a very strenuous hike. I've done a number of hikes in my life, and 3,700 feet of vertical is you're getting after it.
Yeah. And by looking at this, you could see it's absolutely front loaded. This trek is front loaded. You start by going into the Tiger Leaping Gorge ticket office, which I think is really kind of funny. And I think that's why I want to emphasize this. This is a well-maintained, well-operated tourist area.
Right. This isn't some off the beaten path, single teeny little path through the woods or something. This is like an actual official.
Exactly. Like hike. You go to a ticket office and you have to buy a
Right.
ticket to get on the trail. Now, tickets are minimal. It's about $9, but trekkers have to begin at a ticket booth where they give you a map, where they see who you are when you go on the trail.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a big, well-maintained hike.
Right. Now, trekkers begin with a symbolic crossing of the Yangtze River Bridge, spanning the Jinsha River and marking the entrance to the gorge. Along the route, hikers encounter the infamous 28 bends, a challenging uphill stretch with winding switchbacks and 28 sharp bends, presenting the most significant elevation gain in the hike. And that's already what you've referenced. You see how that goes back and forth?
Yeah, all the switchbacks, because obviously in order to gain that much altitude, you're going to have to do it that way. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at, looks like the base there, 2210 meters up to 2670. So you're 460 meters up. You're looking at like almost 2,000 feet of gain right there.
Yep.
Just in that sort of fractional part of the hike.
Right.
That is, I mean, that
intense.
You're going to be feeling that.
You're going to be feeling it. Exactly. Now, at the midpoint of the climb, exhausted hikers can rest at the halfway house, which is a common resting point offering basic accommodations and refreshments. They understand at this point, people might be feeling it a little bit.
Absolutely.
Now, this particular area is really neat because you can go off on what I call a side quest into the gorge to see the rock that represents the point where the tiger leapt across the river. To do so, you take a 3 to 4 mile hike down into the ravine. And in that process, you must cross this rickety old sky bridge. It's like a rope ladder that for all intent and purpose is very safe. There have been no accidents on this bridge, but it feels very exposed and risky. And it's
Indiana Jones.
A little bit. And the bridge also passes very closely to the white water, which at that point is moving very rapidly. So you have kind of these rapids under you in this bridge. Apparently it's very exhilarating. So people love to go down there and see this rock in the middle of the river that represents this tiger. And it's really cool too, because they have all these different monuments and plaques, and they have these like bronze statues of tigers like jumping.
Mm-hmm.
It's really pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Also along this trail, you can see a lot of waterfalls. There's just a lot of scenic beauty heading down to this rock.
Sounds like it.
Now, after passing the midway point and completing the second half of the trails, most adventurers stop at Tina's Guesthouse, which is a favorite with visitors. The area is also known to have a diversity of shops, lodges, and restaurants to entertain travelers. After their adventure is complete, trekkers embark on a 4-hour bus ride to the enchanted city of Shangri-La. Now, I know what you're probably already thinking, so I will confirm the city was not originally named Shangri-La. It was named Zhongdian, but was officially renamed in 2000 to draw in tourists. Officials decided on the name after it was featured in James Hilton's book Lost Horizon, which imagined a fictional utopian lamasery located high in the mountains of Tibet. Now, you do a lot of writing for a living, and I certainly complete a lot of writing for this podcast. So I would think between the two of us, we'd have a pretty good mastery of English vocabulary. So I want to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have any idea what a lamasery is? Because I did not. I had to look it up.
No, and I would just be guessing. Which, is it a place where they keep llamas?
Oh my gosh, you were closer than I was. It is a, quote, monastery of llamas. I didn't even know anything like that existed. So
a monastery run by monks, and they keep llamas there.
Yes.
Okay.
You were way closer than I was. I give you props there. Great job.
I mean,
so anyway, I was incredibly humbled by this experience of having to look up what a lamasery was.
You don't see that word every day.
No. The Chinese city of Shangri-La is nestled close to the Tibetan border and the Haba Snow Mountains. Within Shangri-La, an area referred to as Old Town serves as the main urban center. It offers a blend of traditional Tibetan and Han Chinese architecture and hosts shops, restaurants, and guest houses which cater to the needs of tourists. From Old Town, most travelers take a bus back to Lijiang, thus marking the conclusion of their journey. So ultimately, they would catch a bus from Shangri-La back to the larger city of Lijiang.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was David's plan. He had mapped out a detailed itinerary for this trip. First, he dropped off his backpack in Lijiang at an inn called Jane's Guesthouse. And he had one of those hiking backpacks with like the detachable fanny pack at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So his plan was to take only the necessities while on this 2-day hike in the gorge. And we find out later that he had packed a change of clothes, the Book of Mormon, a copy of Lonely Planet, the travel book, and toothpaste. And I imagine he probably had some kind of water container with him as well, but ultimately just the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And we know he planned to hike to Tina's Guesthouse near the end of the hike. Then he would travel to Shangri-La before catching a bus back to Lijiang to grab his backpack. Then on August 15th at 10:15 p.m., he would hop on a flight to Beijing to grab his luggage. And then he would head to Seoul to meet up with his brother. So that was his ultimate plan. Now, a couple days after the boys separated, George emailed David several times to get the contact information for that friend in Beijing where they had left their luggage, but David never responded. And at the time, George didn't think much of it. He assumed David was on the trail without internet access. I mean, very plausible. And the same was true for David's parents, who admitted it was weird they hadn't received an email from David, but it was very possible he was in an area with either no internet access or no internet cafes.
Sure. Particularly 2004, I mean, obviously internet was widely available, but not like today.
Correct. So just like George, they weren't overly concerned either. However, on August 26, when Michael, David's brother, showed up at the airport in Seoul to pick up David, but found no David, he knew something was wrong. Michael immediately called Kathleen, the boy's mother, to see if there had been any change of plans, and that's when the alarm bells really started ringing for everyone. David was missing. David's family immediately contacted the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to report him missing. In the weeks that followed David's disappearance, Chinese authorities conducted an initial investigation that came up empty. David was not in any hostels, guest houses, hospitals, mental wards, or jails. His passport had not been used, and the $700 he had in his bank account had not been touched. They found his backpack at Jane's Guesthouse, but it didn't really yield any more clues as to his whereabouts. They did find a few undeveloped rolls of film, which were later developed to show pictures of George and David on their adventures. And from these pictures, they were able to piece together what David was likely wearing and what he had with him in the fanny pack. Because clearly, if they saw anything in those photos, but they found those things in the backpack, that would mean clearly they weren't with him in the fanny pack and vice versa. So whatever was missing from his items, they assumed he had with him on the trail.
Okay.
Local police immediately ruled out murder or violent crime because that was practically non-existent in the region, especially along the trail. And it goes without saying there was no sign of David's body along the trail or the gorge. Over the decades, mudslides and falling rocks had claimed a handful of hikers, but in every case, a body was recovered. So it would stand to reason if he fell into the gorge, his body should have been located.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And taking a step back, even at this point, it is curious that the Chinese authorities didn't come up with more clues or sightings in their initial investigation, because honestly, David would have been hard to miss. He was a tall white American with thinning hair and braces who spoke fluent Korean and Mandarin. Right?
Yeah, definitely not going to have more than one of those probably in that area.
So when it was reported that no one saw him, it just didn't hit anybody in the right way. Within weeks, Chinese officials concluded that David had fallen in the Jinsha River and died. But David's parents felt something wasn't right. And honestly, they began to wonder if Chinese officials had looked for him at all. Like, how could they have come to this conclusion so quickly, especially without a body? Remember, David was an experienced hiker, and the gorge wasn't that strenuous of a hike. Yes, it goes up in elevation, but this isn't like mountain climbing, if you will.
It's strenuous. It's just not dangerous, it sounds like.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair to say. So his parents did exactly what you and I would have done. They got on a plane to go look for their child.
Yeah.
On September 9th, 2004, Roy and his two sons, Michael and James, went to Yunnan province with every intention of finding David. Their plan was to retrace David's steps and conduct their own investigation along the way. When they first arrived, they met with local police to let them know they would be conducting their own search. They also hired a translator and a hiking guide named Sean. And Sean was very familiar with the area because he actually ran one of the guest houses. And if you look at that map, Sean's guest house is listed on there. So their group started the search at the beginning of the trail, right where David would have been dropped off by the bus in the city of Kautu, which is right where that ticket office is. Roy, Michael, and James all taped blown up black and white photos of David on their shirts, explaining in English and Mandarin that David was a missing person. While they garnered attention, they didn't immediately meet anyone that remembered seeing David. As they continued, they started to notice things that threw them off a bit. For starters, they noticed new missing person posters for David dotting the trail on trees and poles, and a bunch of policemen wandering the trail with bloodhounds. And while this should have somehow been comforting for the Sneddons, it was quite the opposite. Searching for David with bloodhounds a month after his disappearance made no sense to them. And if the police had already decided David fell into the river and drowned, why are they doing searches at all?
So the posters were put up by the officials. They are not by the Sneddons.
Correct. But they clearly hadn't been there for a month. So it just seemed a little unusual that the Sneddons show up and all of a sudden there's police activity.
Right, putting on a show.
That's exactly how they interpreted it, that it was basically for their benefit. Now, as they proceeded along the trail, something else became painfully obvious. The trail was not nearly as treacherous as the Chinese authorities had led them to believe. Nothing about the hike was even remotely concerning to the group. Now, again, the Sneddons are kind of a more outdoorsy family, so they're used to hiking. So I don't know if the average Joe could have just done this hike easily, but it was something that the Sneddon family did not think would be out of the realm for David at all. The path was very wide and well-maintained. As a matter of fact, so wide and well-maintained that in several areas they saw Jeeps and other 4x4 vehicles driving by. So David would have had no issues on this trail. There would also have been no chance David's body had been swept away by the river because there really wasn't anywhere steep enough to fall and make it all the way into the water. The river was down too far, and while there were a couple of drop-offs, there were no straight cliffs, meaning you could possibly roll a little way down and certainly injure yourself or possibly perish, but there was no way you would make it all the way down into the river.
Okay.
They also noticed how frequently the trail was used. They saw school children, groups of locals, single hikers, and other foreigners. There were also guest houses or places to buy food and water everywhere. So if David had fallen from the trail, how could it have gone unnoticed by someone? Or at a minimum, how could someone not have noticed his body?
Mm-hmm.
The Sneddons pressed on, and to their absolute credit, they were very organized and methodical in their search. Let me tell you a bit about what they did, because I find it remarkable. I think I'm a very organized person, and clearly I've spoken a lot about true crime, but I don't know that I would have thought of everything the Sneddons thought about. First, whenever they approach someone or someone approached them, they try not to ask any leading questions. They would just start by saying, "Did you meet a white guy that speaks Chinese?" Just casual like. And if the person they were talking to said yes, next they would ask him to physically describe the person that they saw. If this passed, they would then ask the person to describe what this person they saw was wearing, including what they were carrying, meaning, do they use the word fanny pack?
Mm-hmm.
If all of this passed, then they would pull out more colored photos of David and ask the person to describe further what they saw. I just thought all of this was so level-headed and brilliant. They were really going in saying, we're going to find David. Like, we're not going to be chasing every lead. We want to get the best ones and zero in on those. And right when they were beginning to get a bit discouraged using this strategy, things started to look up. They were approached by a local guide named Keith Chu Chung, who said he remembered David. On August 11th, he was traveling with a married couple from Hong Kong, headed west to east, toward Tina's Guesthouse. As they walked, they spotted a white Westerner traveling in the same direction around 7 p.m. This man wore a blue t-shirt, gray shorts, a wide-brimmed hat, and a fanny pack tied to his waist. The man politely asked the group in flawless Mandarin if he could join on their hike. The couple liked the boy right away and said yes. The guy said it was a wonderful time because as they traveled, they would take turns talking in both English and Mandarin, which gave each party a chance to practice their language. They traveled together for hours until they wound up at Tina's guest house around 10 p.m. Now, for the Sneddons, this was an absolute confirmed sighting. There were way too many details that perfectly described David for them to think this is anyone other than David.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
But this directly contradicted what the Chinese officials that had reported, because if David made it all the way to Tina's guest house, that means he clearly made it out of the gorge. Now, we will find that this eyewitness sighting was not the only one the Sneddons will find, and I will tell you all about them in part 2. So in part 2, I'm going to tell you the rest of the Sneddons' investigation. I will tell you the reaction the Chinese officials had to their investigation, because they released a 74-page, very detailed document of everything they had done. And they released it to both the American and Chinese governments. And they had very interesting reactions.
The 74-page report from the
Sneddons.
Okay.
From the Sneddons. And they released that to officials. And there were some reactions there. And then I'm also going to tell you the theories about what happened to David. And this will include the most controversial, compelling theory that David was possibly abducted by North Korea to work in the house of Kim Jong-il.
What? That is absolutely crazy. Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to get there.
Okay.
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little branch of hope. So our branch of hope for this month is Futures Without Violence, which we covered in the case of Mary Day, which is a very unfortunate case, just overflowing with cases of domestic violence. And so there was no choice. We knew we had to pick an organization whose sole mission is to prevent domestic violence and to educate people and provide resources in order to prevent domestic violence. They are world renowned for creating mentoring programs for youth. They also have multiple programs for men and boys to learn how to manage their emotions and how to deal with them in healthy ways. Their goal is to always provide resources and the ability for those to free themselves from the cases of domestic violence. Sometimes there is no choice except just to leave. So if you are in a domestic violence situation, we encourage you to reach out to Futures Without Violence, to find their resources, to find safe houses you can go to find counseling programs, to find mentoring programs in order to find a safe place for you, to find a safe place for your children. No one deserves to live in a place where they feel unsafe or they feel unloved. And I'm encouraging you to find that courage. I have never been in a domestic violence situation. I can only imagine how terrifying and defeating this can make you feel and how out of options. But there are options. There really are. And there are organizations out there that can help. If you want more information about Futures Without Violence specifically, you can head to our website, thedarkoak.com, or our Instagram page, The Dark Oak Podcast. If you are our Patreon member, know that a portion of your subscription is going to Futures Without Violence this month and every month. Your dollars are going to help your community. So that's going to make you feel really great supporting the Dark Oak as creators and then helping these community members and showing your support. We never want to be a podcast that is about exploiting victims. We always want to be educating and helping and making the world a little bit better. And we want you to partner with us to do that. So this episode is going to get released a little late for a bonus episode. It didn't quite hit that mark on the calendar for us, but considering all the personal things we have going on, I hope that our listeners will understand.
Listeners, let me step in here. There's a lot going on. Obviously, they had planned this extra release these few weeks in conjunction with their 100th episode. But just keep in mind that Stephanie and Cynthia work on this podcast 100% on their own. They don't have anyone helping. There's nobody editing. There's nobody. So they do all of that themselves. So with obviously Cynthia out for very good reasons, Stephanie is having to do all of that. And of course, continuing to do all the things she does for our home and our children and all these other things. So give her a break. She couldn't quite get it done yesterday. And she really was upset that she couldn't. But she's getting out today. They're going to have the episodes, this coming week, which will also be a tremendous amount of work. But I'm just saying it as her husband, she works very, very hard on this. And this was a real challenge.
Oh, those are really nice things to say. I can't tell you the amount of outpouring of love and support people have given to us, and specifically to Cynthia on those social media posts. She reads every single one of them, and they really do help. They really make a difference.
Absolutely. And because you guys work so hard. And so when you have people say, hey, this is great, or, I really enjoy that, I see it. And, when you get those, how much joy they bring to you guys. I will say I'm very excited about this next episode. I'm actually really interested. Like, I can't wait to hear all this stuff. So that should be very interesting.
Yeah, we actually have some family things that we have to go through this afternoon. So even Barton is not going to get part 2. Normally when we record 2-parters, we try to do it all on the same day, but Barton's going to have to wait, just like you guys.
That's right.
All right, Shiver Seekers, can't wait to have you back. So this is getting released Saturday, and we will see you on Wednesday with part 2 of David Sneddon. All right, Shiver Seekers.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.